Centering pass. Shot missed the goal. And it's clear to center. Bears in a race. Coming up there, Bears. Here comes Thomas. Scores! Thomas scores! And the Leafs win this terrific hockey game. What a finish! Off the defenseman joining that rush, but it's cleared back down. Thomas gave it to Sundin. They go up the net. Sundin scores! That's Sundin. Bullet shot. And the Toronto Maple Leafs win the first game on the best of 7. 1-0. He's coming up over the Ottawa line. For Antropov, shot blocked. Rebound. Goal. Cross wins the game.
It is Sportsfeld Storytime. This month, we are going back to the ice. We are looking back 2002 playoffs, Maple Leafs versus Senators. A rich sort of mini history here of the Battle of Ontario, where both teams were sort of competitive. The Maple Leafs had owned the Senators up to this point, but this sort of felt like maybe this was the year the Sens break through. We'll get into this. A secretly pretty good Senators team with a lot of players that would become like important parts of that generation of players, and the Maple Leafs against all odds, some injury bad luck, some bounces, get into this series. It's a good series, and it all swings on a triple overtime game, and that is what we're focusing on this Sportsfeld Storytime. Game 2 of the 2002 NHL Eastern Conference semifinals, the Maple Leafs and Senators. Jake, how were you as a Maple Leafs fan in 2002?
I would say this year was probably the peak of my Maple Leafs fandom. I think this was the year that like I when I was very young, like if we're going like 0 to 8 or 9, I obviously liked the Maple Leafs and cheered for them, but hockey was not a sport that I really paid a lot of attention to. I have very vague memories of mid-90s hockey, and the team also wasn't very good, like post-90, whatever year that was, 93. So I think that probably played into it. I guess it was not coincidentally as the team started to become competitive and as I got a little older and started watching more of the games. I think like when I think of like Maple Leaf time and like what made me like I was as passionate a Leafs fan I think this year than I was about any team, Blue Jays included. And I remember, I think it's also because like I was 13 at the time, so it's like the right time for watching sports all the time, and games like this that go to 3 overtimes, like you have the endurance of a 13-year-old that it was to not be completely drained by it. But I remember this, I think this year's playoffs of the pre-lockout playoff runs, I think this is the year that I remember the best, and this is the year that I remember caring the most.
This team, a 100-point season, they were 43, 25, and 10. They were second in the division behind Boston, which that's life as a Maple Leafs fan.
The more time things change, yeah.
Sundin had 41 goals, 80 points. Mogilny had 24. He only played 66 games. Your old reliables, Kaberle and McCabe on defense. some of the veteran guys, that classic of that era. There was Roberts and Corson and Domi and Tucker, who was actually second on the team in points, 24 goals as well. Some funny veteran guys. Jurke Lume played a bunch for this team. Dmitry Yuskevich, Reichel and Renberg, and Travis Green.
Renberg was my guy. I love.
Yeah, Renberg was your guy. I liked Renberg too. He had that nice chemistry with Reichel. And he wasn't like a brand name guy.
Mogilny was my ride or die guy on this team. Like I have had the same Maple Leafs jersey since 9th grade, which is a Alexander Mogilny jersey. So he was my guy on this team. But Renberg was sort of you always have those like the underappreciated quote unquotes that you just like fall in love with. Renberg was my guy on that team for that purpose.
That's funny you mentioned that. Mogilny, which I think we'll get into during the game, but you sort of, it's hard to place him. He was both there at exactly the right time in the league and also maybe ahead of his time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he had the high scoring years as a rookie and he had some great years, but you have to figure if he played now, he would be even better, I think.
I feel like he's kind of the midpoint between like a Pavel Bure and an Ovechkin, where like he doesn't have the pure scoring ability that Ovechkin does, but he still had that like speed and skill, but he had his like spot on the ice where if like he got the puck there, he was probably going to score, but he also had that
offensively.
Yeah. That speed and skill thing of Bure. I don't think he was as good as either of those guys, but I do think that he had an interesting mix of their skill sets. And I just remember I think it was the year before this when he was still in New Jersey, he just murdered us in the playoffs. I remember when we got him, I was excited because it meant he couldn't do that again.
Totally. The playoffs broke interestingly for the Maple Leafs here. And I remember because I was 16 and I could drive and life was cool and I had a girlfriend and things were good. It was crazy because on the other side of this, like the Maple Leafs played the Islanders in the first round and it was tougher than it needed to be because Sundin got hurt right away in game one. He took a shot to the wrist and fractured his wrist. And he played the next two games. He played game 2 and game 3, but missed the rest of that series and all of the Ottawa series. So the guy that had been driving them all year long is suddenly not there. But on the other side of it, you get the Senators, who Maple Leafs had absolutely owned in the playoffs, as we went over. And the other thing is Montreal beat the Bruins, who was the team ahead of the Maple Leafs, as we said, in the division. So things were looking like there was a chance. I know we'll get into this a little later on, but boy, I was rubbing my hands together at the prospects of that Carolina series.
That this one really, I think of all the good pre-lockout playoff years, of which there were quite a few, this one at the time and in retrospect, and especially how that Carolina series sort of shook out, this one feels like the one year where it's like, man, I will preface this by saying they would more than likely, if they had beaten Carolina, I believe that they would have more than likely been absolutely spanked by the Red Wings because no one was beating the 2002 Detroit Red Wings. But
the Red Wings had it figured out. They were in the prime of their having it really figured out.
Yeah, but this does sort of feel like the year of like, maybe they could have got back to the final. And then obviously that has not happened since.
And for Ottawa fans, they were feeling very good, actually, as well.
You were right. This is a good Senators team.
Like Alfredsson, obviously their leader, but they had Marian Hossa, who I think watching this game is probably the scariest player on the ice, other than Mike Fisher has some stretches where he's dangerous. But
Hossa has like a 3-minute stretch, and I think it's the second overtime where I don't know how he didn't win the game four separate times.
Martin Havlat, who is also he went on to have a very good career. And my favorite thing, the Senators I mean, you can see Chara, like the beginning of him being the dominant defenseman in the game.
Yeah. And I feel like from a Senators perspective, as we just laid out this sort of blessed path for the Maple Leafs to make a run in the playoffs with Montreal beating Boston and everything falling the way it did. You're a Senators fan. You look at the Leafs just played a tough 7-game series against the Islanders, and they don't have Sundin, and you just paced them in game 1. Like, if you're a Senators fan, this game has to stick as like a huge what if in just like history for your team.
Absolutely. And I mean, they had worked the Flyers ridiculously. And Lalim's numbers, like we get into it as we come into game 2, but he has a 0.32 goals against and a 988 save percentage. Like he was letting nothing in. Ridiculous.
I feel like Patrick Lalime, because he has sort of at least in retrospect, like when you think of, at least from a Toronto perspective, when you think of Patrick Lalime, you think of him letting in the softies in game 7. Like that's the sort of the defining image of Lalime. But like Patrick Lalime had a pretty solid run there for a few years.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then that leads to them thinking they need to change their goaltender, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
But as we were saying, if you're an Ottawa fan, and I knew Ottawa fans at this point in my life, especially after the series starts, they are convinced this is the year that it switches and Ottawa becomes the dominant Ontario team. They win 5-0 in game 1 in Toronto, and just like absolute slap in the face of the Maple Leafs.
Hossa, all by himself, comes in, the pass. Centering pass, score! Alfredsson takes the shot, gave it to Bonk. He winds up, and a rip, score! Bonk fires a high shot, and Joseph could not move fast enough. Alfredsson again, fires a shot, and around the goal, and center, score! 4-0. Alfredsson winds up, the shot scores. Alfredsson, hard shot, one-timer on the setup, and it's 5-0 Ottawa, and they'll remain on the power play. All Ottawa, they're ready.
Well, they certainly were better prepared tonight than the Leafs were. We know the Leafs are coming off a 7-game tough physical series. Ottawa coming off huge success against the favorite Philly, and it's been a very one-sided affair this week.
I remember the game 7 against the Islanders quite well. And I remember thinking it was a 4-2 final. The fourth goal was an empty netter. Was not a like easy home game 7 win by any means, if there is such a thing. But like I remember going into this series thinking, you know, they're exhausted. They have no Sundin. The Senators are good. This was, I know like there's multiple 7-game Toronto Ottawa series. I remember being, I would never say it out loud, but I remember at the time being like, I don't know. I don't know about this one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this was the one where you could sort of see the writing on the wall and say, especially with how fired up they would be when Toronto was clearly a better team, now that Ottawa has taken some steps forward and they became a really strong regular season team. You remember this sort of Battle of Ontario really fueled them to the top of the Eastern Conference. This was one where I came into this assuming they were probably going to lose this series. The no Sundin, everything that went on against the Islanders, it wasn't just the Sundin injury. We forget Tucker got himself in hot water with a low hit on Mike Pekka, which is cannot state. We will get into this, and it comes up over and over again, how much Ottawa hated Darcy Tucker. Like, he was public enemy number 1.
I feel like history has been like, I'm sure if you look at his, I actually have no idea. I was going to say, I'm sure if you look at his play style and numbers from a modern analytics view, he's terrible, but I actually don't know if that's true. What I was going to say is that I feel like history has been unkind to Tucker actually being a pretty decent player at this time. Like when you think of Tucker, you think of the hit on Pekka, you think of him getting run by Alfredsson, you think of him destroying Sami Kapanen before the Flyers knocked us out. And I feel like he doesn't come up a lot in the like great, like I feel like even Domi gets more praise than him. And Domi was a significantly worse hockey player than Darcy Tucker. I feel like Darcy Tucker's sort of legacy as a Leaf is really interesting to me. Maybe I'm wrong in this, and maybe it's just sort of the hockey circles that I follow or read. But I feel like I don't hear or read a lot about Darcy Tucker and A, how much other teams hated him, and B, how popular he was in Toronto.
I think it's sort of, the pendulum sort of swings where at the time he was so popular and so probably overrated because he was a Maple Leaf that I think a counter swing came to like to stamp down some of that excitement. And now it's gone so far that he's probably underrated in the grand scheme of things. Because as I said, you know, he was the second leading scorer on the team. He did score 24 goals, and he comes up big in a lot of the moments the Maple Leafs need him in this little run here, this 5-year span, 6-7 year span.
And I think because like a lot of these guys, sort of the team was so bad immediately after the lockout that like a lot of these guys have sort of not fallen by the wayside, but the idea of a lot of these players, I think the luster was lost pretty quickly.
It got ugly. That's part of the reason why, I think. It's the lockout and the salary cap coming in, and I think some inner locker room stuff. I mean, we look at the veterans on this roster, the Roberts, Corson, Domi, you know, as we mentioned, those guys, that they're sort of, they get lumped together as very representative of that era of Leafs teams that were, you know, they were good for Maple Leafs teams, considering how bad the team has been in stretches.
Yes, I agree with that. The thing that I think is funny about this team of this era, and you sort of alluded to it a second ago by bringing up like the salary cap and all that, is this is the team that arguably got the closest to the goal. And this is kind of the one team from that era that didn't make a silly / insanely fun deadline deal. Their only addition to the deadline was Tom Barrasso, and in my brain, I think because they're all lumped together, I remember watching this, being, is this the Owen Nolan year? Is this the Brian Leetch year? Like which crazy move was this? But in retrospect, you wonder.
That was a fun year, let me tell you.
It really was. But in retrospect, you wonder if they had done a dumb Leafs trade before this run. Who knows?
Who knows, indeed. So we pick it up. We get into where the episode 2 will start, which is an absolute must-win game at the Air Canada Centre. Some funny, weird, like you talk about weird sort of postseason ads. There's a guy named Bob Wren who plays one regular season game, and then he plays one playoff game, and it's game 2. I remember a lot about this season. I do not remember Bob Wren. Do you remember Bob Wren?
I remember Bob Wren only because he was acquired on the same day as Paul Healy in that trade. But if you were to ask me to remember Bob Wren's what he did on the ice in the 2 hockey games he played, I couldn't tell you.
He played 5 career NHL games over 3 seasons and 1 playoff game. He played 9 minutes in this game. And he almost scores like a minute in. Anyway.
Can you imagine if there was a player like that today with like analytics and social media, if there was just like a must-win playoff game and you're dressing Bob Wren and playing him 9 minutes?
Ridiculous.
Be a nightmare.
So your lineups, your game 1 lineups, the Maple Leafs go Belak, Berg, Corson, Domi, Anders Eriksson, this is a remember guy, Travis Green, Paul Healy, Jonas Höglund, Tomas Kaberle, Jyrki Lumme.
God, I hated Jonas Höglund.
Bryan McCabe, Alan McCauley, Alexander Mogilny, Carol Pilash, Robert Reichel, Gary Roberts, Darcy Tucker, Bob Wren, and Cujo in net. Man, my flashbacks of watching Cujo. What a goaltender.
Yeah, man. I kind of miss, I know like I like to make fun of sort of old hockey goaltending a lot, but like there was the early 2000s, like Cujo, Hasek chaos style is so fun.
He was really something to watch.
He has a couple saves in this game where it's like, you probably could have saved that far easier by just standing still.
What an experience it was to have Curtis Joseph in that. Because
we loved him.
Yeah, well, he would make the incredible save, and you were just waiting for him to get beat on a regular wrist shot. It would happen fairly regularly. But we will get into what this game becomes and how it goes. And one of the all-time overtime games in Maple Leafs history. We will get into that in episode 2 coming up.